Hey, it's Friday, everybody. What's going on?
Hey!
It's Friday. I'm having technical difficulty with this light up here, so if it starts strobing or it goes dark, don't be alarmed. I'll get it fixed.
Is that your 48 CFR indicator light that you have?
Yeah. This is the 2 month warning to the rule. The light starts flashing. Oh man! Hey, everybody! It's live Q&A day. He's Daniel. I'm Jacob. We work for Summit 7. We've got over 1,000 clients, all defense contractors. We help them with their DoD cybersecurity compliance obligations through the Microsoft tech stack. We've helped now 21 companies get through their CMMC certification. And let's see here. Let's get this fired up. And we'll do this. We got 21 companies that are certified now. We got 1,000 clients. We got a bunch more in the queue. We've got our CMMC certifications done, both as an MSP and as a defense contractor, which we also do that kind of work. So we walk the walk, we talk the talk. We know what it's like. We've helped a bunch of companies go through it. We're helping a bunch of companies go through it. And we do this every Friday to answer your questions. You can go to CUIHotline.org, fill out the form. You can call the number and leave a message. You can send us messages in our DMs. You can email us, all that cool stuff. We'll queue it up and then we'll get through it on Fridays. And then you can always leave questions in the chat that we can pick up live as we go through. I love Fridays. I love this Q&A. It's so much fun. It's great. It's a great time.
Me too. Because it's one of those things where we get to take all the conversations we have with calls. And then a lot of people, who wish to remain anonymous, which you can do when you submit a question 100%. To us, somebody just posted when you start taking live calls.
Yeah. In the works.
God, that'd be awesome. Anyways, but yeah, we love it, guys. Keep bringing the questions. If we don't know the answer, we'll find out. And let's just have a good time today.
Absolutely. All right, a little bit of housekeeping here. Summit 7 Live Colorado Springs is coming up on March 20th. If you've been to a CS2, then you've kind of got an idea of what the Summit 7 Lives are going to be like, but they're much smaller. So I'll bring this up here so everybody can check it out. So Summit 7 Lives, we're going to do a couple throughout the year. First one's in Colorado Springs. Then we're going to be in Tampa and in Fort Worth as well. So these are going to be half day. We're doing breakfast. We're doing lunch. First one's going to be me and Jason. We're going to be hanging out, talking about everything that's going on with rulemaking, talking about everything that's going on with the requirements, going on with Summit 7, a preview of some stuff that we've got on our roadmap coming out this summer for offerings from Summit 7. I'm going to be workshopping a little bit of what I'll be talking about at CS2. So if you can't make it to CS2 or you want to help me kind of, it's like if you go to a stand-up comedy show and somebody's working on material before they actually film the special. That's what this is going to be like. We're going to be walking through sort of the idea, the analysis, stuff like that. I want to know your thoughts, want to know your questions, and it's going to be a great time. So there's only like 45 spots.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, they want to keep it pretty intimate.
They're very small. This is not a 250 person CS2 event, but we're trying to make them a little more regional. So if you're in the area, you know somebody in the area, and they want to hang out for half a day and get free breakfast and lunch, then tell them to check this out. And there's still some spots left, so be sure to check out the Summit 7 Live. It's gonna be a lot of fun. All righty, let's see here. Daniel, your week in review. To carve out or not to carve out? That is the question, the Shakespearean question that you sent me this morning to make sure to include.
It is the question, and it's the question on top of everybody's mind now, right? As the pressure cooker keeps cooking and people are, at the deciding point of, do I carve out or do I go all in? By carve out, I mean, do I do an enclave or do I go all in? At this point, in all honesty, you're getting closer and closer to this thing being more and more real. And by real, I mean in solicitations and your prime requiring you to produce the certification, right? You used to have the luxury of making this a decision that you could make work with inside your maybe current business practices. As we're seeing the pressure mount, people are now having to do the inverse. They're basically having to go with an enclave solution because of a time-bound commitment that they have in front of them, and then rebuild all of their processes, policies, procedures around a data flow that supports that. Versus before, we've been seeing, hey, this is my data flow. How can I make this work? Right? And it's like, okay, all in or enclave or carve out, as some people call it as well. It's like, this is what makes sense here. This is where you're going to have to maybe refactor some things. And although you can still do that, and a lot of people need to do that to make sure that they have functional operations, with the time constraint ahead of us, a lot of people are saying, listen, I just need you to build us an environment and then help us just refactor everything. Like, we just got to make all the CUI go in there, because we can't afford for the huge organizational impact. And we're on a crazy tight timeline to get a certification, within the next 3 months. I mean, I got people that call me that say, make me compliant in a month. I'm like, well, you obviously don't understand how this works, but yeah. So I say all that to say is, carving out is great. It's usually when about 15% or less of your employee population deal with CUI on a daily or multi-touch point during the week.
Rule of thumb.
It's a good rule of thumb. That's kind of the grading there, the grading matrix. But then after that 15% eclipses, now you're looking at an enclave or an all-in situation, right, where you're starting to bring everything in scope. And so that's kind of the general rule of thumb to carve out or not carve out, with the caveat being, because of time constraints, people are running towards enclaves and just saying, I'm going to have to figure out my data flow and force it into this box just because of what's in front of me. So it's a really interesting dynamic happening in the industry right now. People aren't necessarily doing the right thing for the organization, and by that, doing a top-down review and a true assessment of where they need to be. They're doing the inverse. They're building the boat and then figuring out how to get all the animals on it. So it's kind of an interesting kind of, before the flood hits, right? A little Noah's Ark reference. But,
Well, I mean, it's interesting because it's like you, by waiting a long time, right, and sort of waiting till the last minute, you may have forced yourself into having to do a rapid transformation or migration maybe wouldn't have done if you had started earlier. So, that's like, it's the last economy class ticket on the plane, and you're going to be in the middle seat for the whole flight until you can, plan it.
You can refactor, right?
Yeah. And and we've seen it. Not every organization is ready for that kind of migration or transformation into that sort of environment. I mean, it's a big assumption that not only can you do it quickly, but that the way that you operate can jive with that type of solution.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously can't disclose names here, but there was a 60,000 person defense contractor that reached out to us and said, we need to move everybody within 6 months. We need to move everybody to the GovCloud. And it's like, that level of jarring behavior usually does not fly at most organizations, especially at that scale, right? The smaller you are, the more
what's that famous World War II battle where they got stuck on the beach? There was a movie about it. Somebody in chat help me out. There was a movie where all the British soldiers, was it World War II or World War I? They're all stuck on the beach, like across the English Channel, and they can't get off. That's what that sounds like.
On that movie, when they get all the British commercial boats to come save them. Yeah. Well, I don't know if Christian Bale was in that, but
Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I am around. Yeah, it was Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Good job. You got to brush up on my World War II history here. So, alrighty, let's see here. Okay, so everybody, let me add this up. So March is a great time of year. Late February, March is great because all the congressional committees and subcommittees are having hours-long hearings. It's everybody's favorite time of year. It's March Madness.
For the congressional
for congressional hearings. I love it. It's my favorite time of year. And so over the last couple of days, they're all blurring together. I have listened to, this one was 3.5 hours. This one was 3 hours. This one was 2.5 hours. And listening to congressional hearings on double speed is exhilarating. But the reason that I'm listening to them is because these are things like the Homeland Security Committee's hearing on countering threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party to U.S. national security, the Select Committee on the CCP's hearing on ending the typhoons, referring to Salt Typhoon, Silk Typhoon, Volt Typhoon, how to deter Beijing's cyber actions against the United States. The U.S. House Armed Services Committee had a hearing strengthening America's defense industrial base, so on and so forth. And so there's tons of questions in there. There's tons of stuff that they talk about. And every once in a while, you'll hear them mention something that's relevant to the DIB, cybersecurity, regulations, sometimes even CMMC. And so over the course of listening to, 7 to 10 hours of testimony, I heard them bring up CMMC once. I never heard anybody bring up CMMC as something that needs to go away. The only thing that I heard was them bringing up CMMC, some of the witnesses, as something that people need assistance with, but that it was overall beneficial. So sometimes you'll have this hive mind thing on Reddit or on LinkedIn, or sometimes we'll hear this just in calls with people where they'll be like, oh, Congress is definitely going to have an issue with this. I can tell you that I have not seen any evidence of that whatsoever in any of these hearings. Maybe they're having different conversations behind closed doors, but this has been the same pattern every March for the last couple of years, where they literally just want anything that will help at all try to stem some of these issues. In fact, there was a quote that I pulled out. I'm going to make this into a post later on. It was in the select committee on the CCP hearing from Representative Moulton, and he was saying, I'm not afraid to say that there are lots of places where government regulations go too far, but to simply strip them out willy-nilly when we're seeing a clear issue with companies not doing enough for cybersecurity in ways that absolutely impact our national security, that's a real problem. So, there's these little tidbits in there after hours and hours and hours, but when you line them all up together, the pattern is extremely clear. I cannot imagine a lot of these people are on the committees that have jurisdiction over the CMMC rules. That's not their opinion at all. So you should check them out. Anytime there's hearings, do your part as a citizen participating in our amazing system, and listen to the hearings. They're quite interesting, but especially the ones on cybersecurity, because they're terrifying and very informative.
C-SPAN, man, they just got another subscriber.
C-SPAN, yeah, and all the committees have their own YouTube channels, and so they stream these things. Know that. Yeah, they stream them live. They're really, really good. They're really, really good. So, alrighty, cool. Enough about Congress and regulations and all that stuff. Let's talk about money. Monday. Daniel, we've seen this. We've seen this in calls. We've seen people talk about this. We've seen this happen. Somebody asks you, how can we use CMMC to grow our business? We believe you that it's a thing. We know it's a thing. It is now a thing for us for whatever reason. How can we use it to grow our business? What have you seen?
So here's something that has been happening, and we're seeing more of it. So Jacob and I went to a manufacturing conference 2 weeks ago, I think, in San Antonio.
MFG 2025, MFG, San Antonio.
Great conference. And one of the speakers was an economist, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
And so he was going through basically the economic layout over the next, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, kind of the impacts of previous administration, current administration, what that kind of fallout is going to look like long term. And one of the pieces of recommendation that he gave was, hey, make sure to have some cash reserves on hand. And it's funny, I started thinking, because people ask us this question all the time, you're going to market yourself as having CMMC services, right? As soon as you get that cert, you've spent good money, you're going to go to market and say, guys, I am your supplier for this particular product or service. Like, send all the work to me, right? The other side of it, and this is what got me thinking about that economist, was be prepared from a physical growth perspective. You're going to have the ability to acquire a lot of businesses that primarily do defense work that have not prepared for this. And their actual valuation is going to be relatively low because they aren't already certified, right? And so just be prepared. There's going to be such a large consolidation of other suppliers and subcontractors because they didn't heed the warning that CMMC is coming, the Jacob Paul Revere meme that I hope somebody makes eventually, because you're going to be able to physically acquire and grow your business that way as well. Not only through net new contracts, which will be an inevitability, but you're going to actually acquire head staff, facilities, locations, like at a pretty rapid clip, probably over the next 24 to 36 months. So I say all that to say is market yourself. I'm actually going to talk to a friend of mine to get on a podcast to talk about that. But also just be prepared to have enough cash reserves to be able to make some very selective, acquisitions once it hits the CMMC clearinghouse, I'll call it. So.
Yeah, this reminds me. So we're going to be at CMMC Accelerate next week, actually, next week. So Scott's going to be there. I'm going to be there. A couple people from Summit 7 are going to be there. another one of these cool events, single day, in and out, really, really great. But one of our friends, Matt Ramsey from Blue Halo, is going to be there speaking on a panel. And I was on a call with him the other day. And it was so interesting because he was saying, as you know, the CIO of a pretty massive prime that's been on a pretty big streak of acquisitions for the last couple of years, and has been taking their cyber compliance, cybersecurity, and CMMC efforts extremely seriously. He was saying that he was talking to some of the federal CIOs and he was thanking them for the cyber regulations. And all of us laughed, obviously, because it sounds absurd. And he was like, no, seriously. And he was talking about the conversations that he was able to have with his board and with some of the private equity investors that they were dealing with, and just the way that they were looking at meeting requirements that other people can't meet, using requirements as discriminators for acquisitions that increase their overall valuations. I mean, it had some serious big money impact in terms of the business case for their board and for their investors. And it was fascinating. So I don't know if this is going to be recorded. I hope it's recorded. Either way, maybe we'll have to bring Matt on if he's around, because it was a very refreshing perspective. And he was like, there was no sarcasm in his voice whatsoever when he was talking about it as being what turned Blue Halo from a very successful company into a hyper successful company. It was definitely one of the ingredients.
To add to that, we had a client that just got sold for $1 billion, and they accredit 10% of their valuation, $100 million, to their effort in CMMC and being able to possess that certification, because they went through joint surveillance and all of that. But they attributed $100 million additional valuation of their company because of their cybersecurity compliance state, which was fascinating to me. 10%.
I've heard some people, I know that Ryan Bonner, friend of the show, friend of CS2, has had this conversation with people in the past where non-defense contractors, non-federal contractors, just companies, some very large, like Fortune 500 company folks have come to him and said, hey, we want to get the cert. And he was like, why? Like, why would you want it? And they're like, you don't understand. They're like, NIST standards are the gold standard, but there's no way to prove that you've done it. There's no certification to them. Like, you can't actually prove that you've implemented the CSF. Like, it's just a framework. And so you've got all these documents. We don't work in those kinds of spaces, but we're able to say to people, well, we did these controls, and this is the only way to prove that we've done some version of NIST controls. And we find that valuable. So there's a lot of outside perspectives on this conversation that aren't the standard. It's crushing small business. It's bad for the DIB. It's bad for higher education. It's this or that. There's a lot of perspectives on the ecosystem and its impacts. So, all righty. This is always a fun question. How do we get ready if we don't have CUI yet? And the way that I always like to frame this to people is, if we were starting from scratch in the ecosystem, you necessarily wouldn't be getting the CUI in your environment until you can prove that you have implemented an environment that can control that CUI, which means by definition, you should be able to set up and implement everything that you need to go and get your CMMC certification without actually having the data that the CMMC certification is proving you can protect, right? So what do you think, Daniel? How does somebody get ready if they don't have the data?
So there are very few people that I talk to that are at this stage. And I love it because they're proactive. They're trying to solve the problem before they get into a space that they know is going to have this as a requirement. And the beautiful part about it is you get to design the data flow from the ground up, right? You're not looking to reinvent or refactor what you currently have to some extent. You're actually being able to look at this clean sheet of paper saying, these are the services we provide. These are the services that are going to be in scope for the defense work we're doing. Let's make it work for us, right? And so I say all that to say is congratulations to anyone taking this seriously before you get into a space like the DoD and defense contracting, because you get to start at a clean slate. You get to engineer the security as your initial foot out the door instead of having to go back retroactively and try and refactor the systems that you have. I mean, we talk about this all the time, like ProShop, right? Or other ERP systems, right? That you have to use. Like, we need to make sure they're compliant. Are they hosted correctly? Are they, and if you do that, secure by design or design security kind of upfront, you deal with so few problems downstream. So yeah, anyways, all that to say is good for you. Start the journey. and you get to kind of choose your own destiny at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are not, like you said, in that situation. They already have the CUI and it has seeped into every business function inside their organization. And you got to go through and you got to find it and you got to look at it. Is it actually,
right?
Is it actually CUI? Can you pull it out of the business processes that it has gotten into, or have your business processes evolve so that they cannot be separated from the controlled data flow? And at that point, it's like, oh yeah, we're just going to lift and shift into an enclave in 30 days. Be like, you might have to be lifting and shifting your entire business operation, which is not what people typically think. They think this is just a quick technical problem, so on and so forth. It's all about the data flow. Fun fact, data flow is the key to all of this, right? Jason Sprosser's talked about this. We've talked about this. Data flow is the key to everything. It's the key to scope. It's the key to what's applicable or not applicable. It's the key to how many licenses you need. It's key to everything, data flow. NIST has zero documentation on what data flow is or how to do it. And according to my conversations with Ron Ross, that's because they view this as a business process problem, not a security engineering problem. So, yeah, there is no NIST data flow diagramming, data flow management, data flow analysis standard publication. I think there should be. So maybe they should. Maybe they should broaden
all the time. Like, how do you solve this problem? And again, because it's mostly reactive, we use content search inside of M365 commercial at the time to be able to search and figure out who is exposed to the CUI, right? I think we've mentioned on the live stream a few times, but we have keywords and we have a blog that we've written about it. So if you are interested in trying to hunt CUI at a reactive position, I can send you some stuff if you message me here on LinkedIn. So, but yeah, that's where a lot of people are, because they didn't understand or know that data flow is the first building block of what they have to do. IT is usually just given a prescription and say, go solve CMMC for me. IT doesn't know departmental level data flow. They know I have these systems I keep up to support, but like, that's it. Right. And so anyways,
which is primarily what NIST would say is they're like, yeah, this is a bigger picture problem than what the security or IT team would be doing with implementing controls. You wouldn't be implementing the controls according to certain scope and things like that until you had a understanding of what's going on. Same with their top-down philosophy on policy. But typically what happens is, it all rolls down to the IT team and they have to reverse engineer, a very big picture process, and it doesn't typically work out. So, alrighty, let's see what's going on in chat here today. So yeah, Dark Green said we got to get live calls. Ring.
Love it.
We'll talk to producer Dustin, and we'll work that. Well, it's on the roadmap. We'll put it that way. It's on the roadmap. So, alrighty. John says, if our company is going through a level 2 certification audit, what extent will the C3PAO audit level 1 controls? There's different levels.
All of it and none of it. So because they stack on top of each other, like Jacob was saying, like, you're going to actually have all the level 1 controls as part of your level 2 scope. Now, what they're not going to do is they're not going to look. So if you have an enclave, all 110 controls, including the 17 inside of level 1, are going to be assessed in your enclave. However, a C3PO is not going to turn over and look at your out of scope environment, which would be for just FCI data at level 1. So they're not there to assess your commercial corporate FCI environment, unless you're paying them a separate assessment fee that, just for peace of mind, you are assessing that, which is not a requirement to be certified in. But if you just, again, want that peace of mind, you could pay for a different assessment for the 17 practices as part of your corporate FCI environment. Yeah.
I think, it's one of those things where all of the requirements that are assessed by level 1 are from NIST SP 800-171, and NIST SP 800-171 is assessed in its entirety at CMMC level 2. So CMMC level 1 is not a prerequisite for level 2. It's different data, different scope. Often, sometimes it's the same, but doesn't have to be. And it gets back to the whole idea that CMMC is not really a maturity model. It was never a maturity model. These requirements at level 1 are not the stepping stones to the requirements at level 2. They're just a smaller set of things that there was an authority for that are related to the larger set of things that there was an authority for. So we just drew a line and said, there you go.
Here it is.
Yeah. So they're going to look at all the requirements in 800-171. And any of the requirements that are in level 1 are at level 2. So they're going to look at all of that stuff, but the scope and stuff is going to be different, like you said. So, all righty. Christoph is here, friend of CS2, the magic man himself. If you haven't looked at Christoph's books, you should definitely look at his books. People who went to CS2 Huntsville were looking.
I have one somewhere right over here, actually.
Yeah. Books are awesome. Love them. I use them as references all the time. Still want a DFARS in plain English when you get a chance, Christoph. Ooh. He says, do you think the various FAR supplements for civilian agencies could be abolished? Will the FAR and supplements change so much from DOGE reform that I need to write another book in the government contracts in plain English series? Well, I don't think that DOGE is going to abolish much of the FAR, DFARS, or other supplements. I still am very skeptical about the effectiveness of what DOGE is doing, given how many of the actions they've taken and then reversed and then taken and then reversed again. So they're off to a rocky start in terms of axing things and then keeping them axed, but we'll see. So do you think the various FAR supplements for civilian agencies could be abolished? I don't think so, because I don't think that the various civilian agencies are going to stop procuring things. So I don't think that they'll abolish the supplements. I haven't heard anything like that. Of course, I stay pretty focused on a very narrow part of the DFARS and the FAR itself. So bigger picture, I'm not sure. But I would always like to see more books. So hopefully if you're able to add to the series, then you definitely should. Anybody who doesn't follow Christoph on LinkedIn, definitely do that. Definitely check out his books. They're awesome resources. So I don't think that they're going to go away.
To a FAR CUI book here eventually here, Christoph, because that's brewing as we speak. So
yeah, I mean, you could probably just do cybersecurity acquisition regulations in plain English and take the FAR, the DFARS, the HSAR, and all the other ones, and just do a book on those by themselves. And I'd actually say that'd probably do pretty well. So if you want somebody,
great book.
If you want somebody to write the foreword, hit me up. So, all right. So John's back. He said, we manage all CUI data within an enclave, but FCI data flows to certain facilities outside of the enclave. If the C3PAO level 2 cert is auditing the enclave, will they also have to audit level 1 controls for FCI?
So in the CMMC world, level 2 process store transmit CUI is kind of the boundary of what you're defining. So if you have FCI assets outside of the scope of your CUI boundary, you would look at those as external assets or external boundary, external connections, ideally. So as long as they're not processing, storing, or transmitting CUI, like we see this a lot with like applications, right? Hey, I've got an ERP system, but I've redacted all of my CUI from it, but I still need to connect to it. And it does have FCI. I need to connect to it from the enclave, right? So again, you're deeming it an out of scope asset for CUI. It is an external connection to a different system that is part of your CMMC level 1 boundary though. So they're not going to look at the 17 practices of that FCI system that you're deeming out of scope for CUI, right? Now, if you want to do due diligence, document that external connection, right? Hey, we connect to this application. It does not process, store, or transmit CUI. We deem this as out of scope for the CMMC level 2 certification boundary, but you would deem it in scope for your level 1 only boundary.
Yep. Yeah, it's a fun game that you get to play when you have different
it feels like a shell game, doesn't it? It's like,
yeah, you have different data flows for different types of data. I mean, that makes sense, but it does get a little weird because you're looking at the requirements for what's going to be assessed, and you're like, well, these are different areas, they're different data flows. But yeah, your assessment scope is not always going to be the same thing across different levels. All righty, let's see here. Get rid of this. Bring up some more chat. Hey, Bobby's here. Bobby's here.
Billions and billions.
I have known Bobby since I got out of the Navy. We actually worked together at MilSatcom back in the day, and we worked together at the NIST MEP Center in California, CMTC. He and I were learning and digging into 800-171 in manufacturing environments as a bunch of young chaps early on. So love seeing Bobby around. Thanks for stopping by. Let's see here. Jonathan says, what is your perspective on online CMMC documentation template packs, such as those from the CMMC Center of Awesomeness?
First off, CMMC Center of Awesomeness, if you do not know about them, free public resource put on by some incredible people If you need guidance for CMMC, an incredible resource. Highly recommend. Here's the fun part. I know a lot of people that go through CMMC Center of Awesomeness, or they're using a tool like Future Feed, or they're buying packs of documentation from other either C3POs or RPOs. And here's the sad reality. A lot of people, at least, that are downloading those, and they're great resources. And even NIST has a publication of a templated SSP, which isn't as robust or great, but it's, again, something that you can at least start with. They don't take that and fit it to their environment. They just fill in blanks.
Yep.
And so I've seen so many filled out SSPs that have little to no alignment with the actual environment that they've built.
And it's immediately obvious. I mean, you can tell right away.
Yeah. Like, I was talking to a client or a prospect this week. This company was using a third-party Enclave SaaS provider. And they were like, yeah, they just sent us their SSP, and their SSP just says, we do this. I'm like, well, that's not enough. I appreciate that at least provided you one, but it's almost like they didn't fill out the blanks needed to actually show what responsibility that they're in, right? Or what they're doing. So yes, long story short, there's great resources out there. I know Amira at CUI Solutions has a documentation thing. I know we have documentation projects and things like that. But again, it's a great starting point, but just make sure to fill them out that map the environment that you have.
We did a podcast episode a couple months ago on, I think it was called Fun with NIST Documentation or something like that. And so the poor man's version of going through these templates, which some of them can be a little pricey, is if you look at the -1 controls in 853, these are all of the policies for each of the control families. They don't show up in 800-171 revision 2 because NIST assumed that you already had a governance program in place. You already had an information system, information security program in place that was informed by management decisions documented in policy. That was incorrect for 99% of people. So how would you know what a good policy looks like without spending any money? Well, 853A is how you evaluate controls in 853. So if you go to the 853A for the -1 controls, they're all the same except for the words that get substituted. It's the same template, if you will. It's got a list of things that says a policy should have this, it should have this, it should have purpose, it should be aligned to this, it should be signed by these people, it should be reviewed, it should be blah, 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 blah. So you can take that 853A template and start to see the shell of what a decent policy would look like. And you'll find that some of the other offerings like Center of Awesomeness take that 53A controls and they beef them out into some really intense and very awesome, if you will, templates. But you can see them for yourselves. I mean, this is free and you can read it. So I would recommend that people check out 853A verification procedures for the -1 controls. It's the first one when you open 853A AC-1. And it'll show you the template of what a policy should look like. It's also great if you're going to buy a policy. At a minimum, those policies should probably include those fields before you spend any money. If they're radically different than what you see in those NIST templates, then you're probably like, I don't know if this is going to pass the sniff test. So, but you should check those out. Yeah, Bobby said they're super detailed. There's a lot in there. They're pretty great. I agree. Bobby knows what he's talking about. Everybody go follow Bobby. Alrighty, Sandy says, about this level 2 self-assessments will be rare, quote, you haven't talked about the phased in rollout. The DoD memo says at the conclusion of the phase in period, PMs, program managers, will designate a CMMC level as described in attachment 1. Does that mean these rules about rare level 2 self-assessments won't be in effect until phase 4? No, it does not. No, it does not, because the DoD provides tremendous discretion to the program managers and the contracting officers about which levels they are going to select throughout the phased roll-in period. Just because you're in phase 1 and phase 1 is for, not for CMMC level 3, for example, doesn't mean that an acquisition for something that requires CMMC level 3 wouldn't squeak through. And the reason why we say that level 2 assessments will be extremely rare is because the guidance in that DoD memo that came out a couple of weeks ago says any contractor handling data under the defense subgrouping of the NARA CUI registry, so controlled technical information, naval nuclear propulsion information, defense critical infrastructure information, there's a couple of them in there. If you're handling those data categories, then the minimum requirement is a CMMC level 2 C3PAO certification assessment. And so if you are dealing with that data and you're in phase 1 or phase 2, then you're going to get a CMMC level 2 certification assessment requirement in the solicitation. They're not going to just arbitrarily make it level 1 or make it self-assessment. So it won't be out until phase 4. We actually heard this. We heard this on a call maybe a week or two ago where somebody on the call was saying, well, we're not that worried about this because when CMMC shows up in the solicitation and in our contract, we have 3 years to get the implementation done because it's going to be on a phased rollout. And we're like, that's not, the phased rollout is not for your implementation. You have to have your implementation done and certified in order to take award of the contract, which could be a month or two after the solicitation comes out. The phased roll-in over the course of several years is how long it takes for DoD to get all of the various solicitations up to date for including CMMC requirements. So it's more of a phased rollout for them and not for you.
Yeah, it's contract option years and new contracts is where they're starting, right? As part of that kind of phase 1 and just going to keep pushing that down until they've kind of hit all of them at that point, right? At least the majority of them. The tricky part is even if you zoom out a little bit from the DoD memo, and we see this all of the time, because guess what? Contracting officers don't know. They don't know who's going to be sending you what type of data. And so we've seen the CYA coverage of, historically of like, they're going to oversubscribe the requirements for the sake of covering themselves. And the DoD is pretty risk adverse, as you can imagine, right? So yes, the DoD memo, Jacob's absolutely right. But also if you take the human element in it, not only from a prime or a direct contracting officer with the DoD, but also even your primes from a risk aversion, it's going to be hard to dodge.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, let's see here. Well, actually, now we're on this subject. Have you seen this? Have you seen people reacting to the memo guidance at all when you've been talking to folks? I remember the other day there was a call where somebody was saying that they've been a contractor for like 10 years and they're getting ready to come up on their option period, haven't done anything. And so they were kind of looking at like, well, when are option years going to be relevant and this and that? They had bigger problems on their plate than when option years were going to come in. But this memo came out, doesn't really get the headlines. It's not really out, it's not going to be on the evening news or anything like that. So if you're not tuned in, then you're not going to hear about it. But it
and that's the problem. We are the echo chamber. Like the people we follow on LinkedIn, the people that follow us, like we are aware because of who we follow and connect with, and because we've been paying attention for X amount of years, right? Even the people on this live stream, you are insanely more informed than the majority of the people that we talk to first time. I really feel like I think primes are learning they have to do a better job of this. Primes just have not communicated the severity of what's happening to their supply chain to the extent that they probably should have over the past 12 to 24 months. They're saying, hey guys, fill out the survey and tell us when you're going to get certified. Not if you don't do this, there might not be work for you in 12 to 24 months. So anyways, all that to say is like, it's hard to gauge, because the majority of people I talk to, that pick up the phone because their prime all of a sudden said, I've got to do the CMMC thing. They have no clue about the memo. They have not been sent that. They don't know the phase rollout. They just can barely spell CMMC most of the time. Right. And it's a hard place to be when you're starting from ground zero like that.
Well, we've talked about this before, where it's like we've been doing this for years now, and the sessions on stage are still 45 minutes, right? Including Q&A, and it's like, how many memos, how many rules, how many guidance documents, how many controls, how many explanations, how many quotes from webinars, how many DoD strategy documents have come out over the years that add to this broad understanding of what's going on. If you are starting from zero and you need to understand all that stuff, it is a tremendous amount of information. So
a lot of catch up. And I have a lot of empathy for those of you, if you are watching for the first time or are newer to CMMC, I've got a bunch of empathy for you because it's hard to play catch up. And
It's literally a full-time job. Just ask me.
is.
Just
Yeah.
to keep up
We got
with what's
a
going on.
full-time guy doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, Jason's got a counter argument here for templated policies. He says he's of the opposite opinion. Templated policies and procedures are good for reference, but even if they're tailored, most of the time they do not align with how the business conducts its business. Policies and procedures need to be organically grown from a top-down mindset and goes back to the principles of GRC and information security. I don't disagree with you. I would say most of the time people look at templates as a fill in the blanks, Mad Libs piece of paper, and they don't really live by what the document is supposed to do. That doesn't mean that they won't sort of grow into it over time. But then again, it can be very difficult to start from a blank sheet of paper and then craft a comprehensive policy if you don't have them, and most people don't have them. So the templates are a great framework for filling in the blanks, but you do have to use them. So it's a little bit of both, in my opinion.
It's the bumpers at the bowling alley, right? You got them up. You want to get the ball down the lane as far as possible. They're definitely a good place to start. But I agree with you, Jason. Like, I've seen so many SSPs that are either left blank or tailored in a way that aren't actually accurate, right? And so I was talking to a C3PAO the other day, and they're like, we're having so many false starts. Like, they can't get out of the phase 1 of the CMMC assessment process with these clients because they cannot produce real or accurate documentation to even begin the assessment. And so, I agree with you, Jason. Use them as maybe a framework, your guardrails, if you will. But a lot of times they need to be orchestrated at a higher level, than starting there for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Jeff Smedley is here.
Hey.
What an awesome picture.
Somebody who has done it right and who has jumped out of more airplanes than I can even count. He is awesome.
This is Jeff jumping out of assessments that go poorly. He's like, see ya.
That's
I'm
right.
out of here.
Get me out of here.
Also, Jeff will be there at CMMC Accelerate with our friends at Hypori in DC next week on the panel with Matt Ramsey. So if you can check it out, definitely check it out. Jeff says detail in data flow reflects the maturity of the company, and I would agree. If anybody knows, Jeff definitely knows. So I listen to what Jeff says. I'd like to be like Jeff.
He's a great connect on LinkedIn, and he knows a lot. So highly recommend to reach out to him.
We're back to the same idea, though, of data flow, where it's like, NIST never intended for 853 to teach somebody how to establish an information security program. They never intended for derivative standards like 171 to teach people how to implement these security programs. The way that I describe them is that they are toolboxes, not tutorials. And so the fundamental assumption is that they would be requirements that companies with existing levels of maturity could easily meet, which if you have existing levels of maturity, they're not impossible to meet. However, if you take that assumption and you throw it into an ecosystem where there isn't a lot of pre-existing maturity, then stuff breaks, and the process and the resources that you need to learn how to meet the requirements are not necessarily the requirements themselves. And NIST doesn't even talk about how to do data flow, what it is, or why, because why would they do that? That's just not something. Circa 2000, 2002, when NIST created all these things after FSMA was passed, they were going into an environment where entire federal agencies already existed. They already had executives. They already had leadership. They already had policies. They already had information security teams. They had budgets. It just wasn't calibrated very well. It wasn't controlled very well. And so that's where the 853 and FIPS 189 and FIPS 200 were designed to operate. And then as the years went on, more and more use cases were like, oh, we can use it here. We can use it there. We can use it here. We ripped a tiny piece of it out and said, here's 800, 171. And you gave it to people who are the direct opposite of a massive federal agency. And people wonder why it's hard for them to understand. So it's the irony of calling it the cybersecurity maturity model certification, because the standards that it verifies are built on the assumption of significant amounts of pre-existing maturity, but we don't talk about that. So,
well,
already
people ask, there's such a tension in the CMMC world, right? Of like, oh my gosh, they're making me do this. And some people are like Blue Halo, they're like, this is an incredible opportunity, right?
Yeah.
The amount of people that I talk to that are like, they're making me do this. And then I ask them about their cyber posture under NDA, of course. I'm like, do you not see, like, look in the mirror, like, this is the reason we're having to do this.
Right.
But to your point, Jacob, like, they've got the toolbox, but they have no frame of reference on how to actually do this. And there's so few cyber professionals. I mean, I did a conference a couple of years ago, and I think the deficit was like 100,000 plus unfilled jobs in the cyber realm, and it's like, it's like there's just not enough informed people out there to help.
Back to that thing I was talking about at the top, where I was saying I was listening to all these congressional hearings. Anytime you listen to a congressional hearing about the defense industrial base, the majority of the time, the witnesses, the representatives, they're all talking about workforce issues in the DIB. They don't have enough skilled labor. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough workforce. And anytime you listen to a different hearing on cybersecurity issues, what do they talk about? No workforce. There's no workforce. There's not enough people. There's not enough skilled labor. There's not enough people in this situation. Now in the DIB, you've got a double workforce issue. You don't have workforce regularly, and you don't have the cyber workforce, which is why I went to go work for an MSP, because it was clear as day to me that you weren't going to find 100,000 people to go in and work at these companies. They were going to have to outsource it to a handful of companies that were going to do the work for them. So the workforce issue in the DIB, they get it from both ends here. So
yeah, it's real.
All righty. Dark Green says, do you anticipate a larger number of companies needing CMMC level 3 in the future compared to what you thought in the past? So our favorite phenomenon, government estimates for how many companies need to do stuff, are not usually reliable for predicting the future. The DoD has said for years it'll be a very small number of companies that need CMMC level 3, because not a lot of companies handle their sort of critical or priority CUI that they've talked about in the past. However, it doesn't, anybody that's worked in classified spaces or around sort of any type of data protection knows that everybody wants to work with the cool data, right? And if you're working with secret data, it's not as cool as top secret data. And if you're working with TS data, it's not as cool as compartmented data, right? And so the lower down you are, there's a little bit more of a stigma around it. So I could easily see PMs or whoever being like, oh, this project that I'm working on, this thing is super important. It's going to need level 3. That could be a very real phenomenon in certain ways. The list of data types that are going to be required to have CMMC level 3 is run by a different office in the Pentagon. It's the Office of the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. Allegedly, they're going to come out with guidance for people to know how to determine CMMC level 3, but I have not seen that guidance published.
Nope.
So I get the sense that more companies will need it than people think. I still don't know if it's going to be a lot of companies, but it's a humongous jump in cost, complexity, and things like that. The other variable here is, what are the primes going to say, right?
Yeah.
Are the primes going to say that they want you to hit CMMC level 3 when you're dealing with their critical research and engineering data? That could easily be something that they decide of their own volition. They work on these internal R&D programs that so the way that this often works is you get like the Lockheeds and the Northrops of the world working on some pretty kick-ass R&D high-speed stuff internally. They come up with something super sweet. They show it to the government, and then all of a sudden there's a solicitation out there for this super high-speed, super sweet thing that they came up with, right? Yep. So they're very protective of this R&D information. So I could easily see people at the primes being like, we want level 3 for our data, completely outside of whether or not the DoD told them to do it. So there's a lot of possible reasons why more companies could need level 3 in the future, but I still don't know if it'll be a lot.
I don't know either. When you go to the website here and you can kind of scroll down and see different kind of categories that could very easily fall into that critical CUI, which would be level 3: advanced computing and software, advanced materials, biotechnology, directed energy, energy resilience, future generation wireless, human interface devices or human machine interfaces, hypersonic. So like there are quite a few things here that if you're on the bleeding edge of some of these, you could expect CMMC level 3. Or to your point, Jacob, with the private contract situation, right? They could just say, hey, supply chain, I want you to be certified because you're helping us build a product we want to pitch to the government. Now, the interesting part about that is because CMMC Level 3 is a DIBCAC assessment, basically, how are they going to prioritize, organizations to go through that certification? Do you have to have a pending contract, an existing one? Can it just be a private relationship and you need to get certified? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle those Level 3s for sure.
It's such I almost forget that CMMC Level 3 is DIBCAC only these days, because we were just talking about this the other day with the FAR CUI rule. Comments are due in like 2 weeks, by the way, for the FAR CUI rule, everybody. But part of the FAR CUI rule, which extends the requirement to protect CUI with 800-171 to all federal contractors, not just defense contractors, they also talk about 800-172 being in requirements for other types of federal contractors. Well, they leave the requirement for third-party verification of implementation up to agency discretion. What happens when, I don't think if, when other agencies decide they want people to get CMMC certifications, and then another agency like NASA or Department of Energy says, we want you to get Level 3, DoD auditors are going to audit a contractor that's not a DoD contractor? Maybe, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work, right? Like, do you have to come up with an alternative CMMC Level 3 assessment outside of that through, I don't know how that's going to work, but the FAR CUI rule extends 800-172 requirements, which would be verified by Level 3 to all federal contractors. So I don't know how that'll
work. And when CMMC 3.0 drops, to Dark Green's comment, maybe they'll start outsourcing that to C3PAOs, right? Maybe this is just a trial period and then they commercialize Level 3 certifications potentially.
Yeah. And just a last note here, something that we've known for a while, a pretty strong indicator that you will need CMMC Level 3 is if you have had a knock on the door from DIBCAC in the past for them to do a high confidence assessment on you. This is not your joint surveillance assessment where you asked them, like vampires, to come into your house and verify your controls. This is if they showed up of their own volition and said, hey, we got some questions for you. That's been a pretty strong indicator for a while that you are, for whatever reason, on the radar of R&E, and they have said, go figure out what's going on in that environment. So a lot of the companies at Level 3 know they'll need Level 3, but if you have added DIBCAC high assessments, just double check. Yeah. All righty, let's see here. Megan says, missed last week. Apology. Thanks for hanging out literally every week. Sometimes, sometimes we miss a week. Not a big deal. Any thoughts on the 48 CFR CMMC publication timing? Seems it is taking longer for the final proposed rule to get submitted to IRA than expected, especially given it was very straightforward. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are it is not taking longer than expected, as it turns out. We think that it could go faster than average for a lot of reasons, but faster than average would be June. So we're still quite far away from a time period where we'd be like, geez, what the heck is going on in there? I would say the summertime is really the time where we're expecting with a lot of confidence that we would see the final rule get published. And then there's a delay period before it goes into effect. The reason why we say it's summertime is if you take the average amount of time that DoD rules take to go from proposed to final published rules, it's like 283 business days, which would put the publication of the 48 CFR rule like the end of 2025. However, the 32 CFR rule, its big brother, like way bigger brother, went 30% faster than that historic average going back to 2009. So we just go with the 30% faster number because I really would struggle to see how it would take longer than the big, way more complicated rule, way more public comments. I just don't think that that would happen. So if you take that 30% faster figure, then that kind of puts it around the June timeframe. Call it summertime is if you want to be very conservative. Now, there's been rumors, been blogs, people have made statements that it could have been as early as March. I've never seen how that would be possible. That would be phenomenal. I mean, it could happen, but it would be pretty stunning if it were that fast. I would have to do the math and figure out how much faster than average that would be. So I don't think it's going to be March. My money is still on early summer for when we would see it published. So yeah, it seems like it's taking a long time, I think, because it's the only one that we're waiting on before the phased rollout starts. But as of right now, we are still on schedule and still confidently ahead of schedule. We haven't heard any reason why that timeline would slip any to the right at all. So
now, I mean, you have the added benefit of Katie Arrington being the DoD
Yes.
CISO, and then a week ago, now the DoD CIO, she is. So I have a feeling Katie is going to do whatever it takes, move heaven and hell to get 48 CFR back to OIRA to finish the rulemaking process, if I were a betting man. So
yeah, absolutely. Dark Green says, regarding vulnerability scanning 3.11.2, does this require the scans to be privileged? I can't remember if privileged scans is a separate requirement or not. I'll have to look it up for you. There is oh yeah, it's in there a bunch. There is language in there. Let's look it up here. Quickest way to tell is go to 171A. I don't have it memorized, so sorry everybody. It's a live show. Blah 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 blah. 3.11.2, scan for vulnerabilities in organizational systems and applications periodically and when new vulnerabilities affecting those systems and applications are defined. In order to verify it, you've got items A through E, vulnerability scans. The frequency is defined. The scans are performed during that defined frequency. They're performed on applications during that defined frequency. They're performed on systems during that defined frequency. Performed when new vulnerabilities are identified. I believe the discussion section of 3.11.2 talks about privileged scanning, and if I recall correctly, what they did, this is one of the parts where things get tricky, is if you look in 853, the requirement is derived from RA5. Oh yeah. So 3.11.2. The requirement in 171 is derived from the 853 control RA5 vulnerability scanning. 853 is organized in what are called base controls and control enhancements. So if you've ever looked in 853, something like AC2, RA5, SA9 are base controls. Sometimes you'll see most of the catalog says something like AC2 parentheses 3, RA5 parentheses 10, SA9 parentheses 2. Those items that have parentheses next to them are called control enhancements. And those are designed, they essentially orbit around these base controls. They're designed to literally just enhance whatever that base control is. So you can't have a control enhancement unless you also have the base control. So RA5 describes vulnerability scanning control at a high level. The control enhancement RA5 parentheses 5 is privileged access for vulnerability scanning. So I would have to go back. I'm not going to do it live. I have to go back and read through the control enhancement, and then read through the requirement in 171, and also compare corresponding entries in 53A and 171A. And you'll see where they borrowed the language, either in the requirement directly or maybe just in the discussion section. And this is important because sometimes NIST took parts of 853 controls that would be part of the requirement had they ported it over. They cut part of it out and they left it in the discussion section. And that doesn't work because they talk about at the beginning of their documents, the discussion sections are not requirements. They're just informative references. I think the language that they use is these are informative, not normative requirements. So if they say do vulnerability scanning, and in the discussion section, they say privileged access for vulnerability scanning is super duper great. That is actually not part of the original control. They have to add that in as a requirement. So I would have to go back and double check the language before I give you the right answer. But that's my process for verifying what does a control say. I always go back to the 53 control and the 53A verification for that control before I make a determination about what 171 does or doesn't say.
What a lovely way to end the show
today. Man, time flies when you talk about 853.
Am I right? So much fun.
All right, everybody. It's been an hour already. These hours fly by. We got a bunch of stuff in chat. We got a bunch of questions that got queued up. We had some people submit stuff in the forum that we didn't get a chance to get to. We'll get to them next week. If you find this afterwards, you can always shoot us a DM. You can always fill out the form. You can always leave a message at the hotline number, and then we'll queue it up. Like always, we're going to be at CMMC Accelerate next week. We're going to be at Summit 7 Live in Colorado Springs the week after. CS2 Reston is coming up in May. We're live every Friday for Q&A. We do a podcast every Thursday for what's going on around CMMC. If you find this on YouTube, like and subscribe. You can find it on Spotify. It's everywhere. We're always on LinkedIn. And thanks for hanging out. So we'll see you next week.
See you guys.